You won't regret it. I promise. Subscribe. She tried to strip me bare 70%. Can you believe it? 70% of everything I built with my own hands, my own back, my own lungs filling with dust and concrete when I was still a young man pouring foundations in the heat of Miami. That's how it began. Not with an argument in the kitchen, not with a slammed door or a confession, but with a number scrawled cold across divorce papers. 70. And for a moment, it didn't feel real. It felt like a typo, but it wasn't. Jessica, my wife, the woman I once thought was stitched to my very soul, walked into that courtroom as if the world already belonged to her. Do you know that kind of confidence? The brittle kind, the one bought by expensive suits and clever lawyers downtown who polish their shoes more than they polish their consciences. She had an army. I had silence. Isn't that how these battles often look? One side armored in words, the other clutching nothing but truth. I won't lie to you, I almost broke. In the weeks leading up to it, I sat alone in my office in Coconut Grove, blinds half drawn, like a crime scene, coffee gone cold beside me, phone buzzing with her demands. And I kept asking myself, how can a person who once swore to love you with her last breath plot so carefully to bleed you dry? What do you call that? If not betrayal of the highest order. But then, isn't betrayal always born in silence first? In the little moments, her late nights, the passwords changed without explanation. The way her laughter tilted slightly away from me at dinner parties. Looking back, it was all there. I just didn't want to see it. My weapon, when it finally came, was only 2 pages long. Strange, isn't it? 2 pages against towers of binders her attorneys lugged into the room. 2 pages that could fit in a jacket pocket, trembling slightly between my fingers. But every line cut clean, precise. The prenuptial agreement she pretended never existed. The bank records. The emails she forgot I'd saved. The kind of document that doesn't argue, it simply reveals. The judge read it, slowly at first, lips tightening, eyes darting. Then he laughed, not cruelly, not mockingly. He laughed like a man confronted with the sheer audacity of human greed. And in that laugh, Jessica's whole case cracked apart like glass struck at its weakest point. Her face, oh, her face, pale as the marble floors beneath our feet. Do you think I enjoyed that moment? You might expect me to say yes, but the truth is more complicated, because victory doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't erase the nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan, wondering how I'd been such a fool. It doesn't erase the sound of her voice whispering promises years ago, promises now revealed as counterfeit. Winning only confirmed what I had lost long before, the marriage itself. When I walked out of that courthouse into the humid Miami air, the city buzzing with traffic and distant music from a cafe, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not vengeance, but freedom, thin and sharp, like the first breath after being underwater too long. And isn't that what we really want at the end of all these battles? Not more money, not more revenge, just the right to breathe again. That's where my story begins, not with loss, not with wealth, but with the question that lingers. How do you rebuild trust in yourself after the person closest to you tried to unmake you? And I wonder, if it had been you, standing there with nothing but 2 pages in your hand, would you have done the same? That night, after the courthouse emptied and the echo of footsteps dissolved into the corridors, I drove back to the house that was no longer a home. Funny, isn't it? How walls remember arguments better than laughter. The stucco exterior still gleamed under the streetlights. The bougainvillea still spilled over the fence, but I could almost hear the ghosts of slammed doors and broken promises humming between the walls. A house can't love you back, but it can remind you of everything you've lost. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the counter where Jessica used to slice mangoes in the morning, sunlight catching on her wedding ring as if it were a promise etched in gold. I used to think those mornings would last forever. Isn't that the cruel trick of routine? It disguises fragility as permanence. And now, standing there, the air smelled not of fruit but of disinfectant, a hollow scent, sterile, as if the place itself wanted to erase her presence. I poured myself a glass of bourbon neat, because ice felt like a concession, and sat at the dining table alone. The wood was scratched from years of family meals, of elbows leaned too hard, of spilled glasses and hurried conversations. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling the weight of time pressed into it. Objects carry memory, don't they? Sometimes more faithfully than people. I thought about the first apartment we rented together on Coral Way, the cramped kitchen where we burned more dinners than we finished, the mattress on the floor, the fan rattling through sleepless nights. Back then, all I owned could fit into 2 suitcases, and she swore she loved me not for what I had, but for who I was. Did she mean it then? Or was that too a performance rehearsed in advance? Here's the part that cuts deepest. I wanted to believe her. Even now, after everything, some foolish part of me still wishes those mornings in the apartment were true, untouched by greed or calculation. What do you call that? Nostalgia? Denial? Or just the stubbornness of a man who refuses to accept that the foundation of his life was built on sand? I drained the glass and listened to the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It pressed against me, heavy, insistent, like a reminder that I was no longer half of a pair, but a man standing alone in a house full of echoes. And I thought, maybe freedom doesn't feel like wings. Maybe, at first, it feels like weight. The days that followed were thick with ritual. Morning coffee at the small round table by the window. Except now there was only 1 cup, 1 spoon clinking against porcelain. I tried to read the paper, but the headlines blurred, words slipping off the page like water refusing to be held. Do you know that sensation? When your mind insists on distraction, but your heart drags you back to the same wound, over and over again. Neighbors waved politely when I stepped outside, but their eyes carried questions they never dared to ask. In Miami, gossip circulates faster than the breeze off Biscayne Bay. They knew, or at least they thought they knew. And isn't that another kind of trial? The silent judgment of the people who watch from their porches, who pretend not to pity you. I started walking in the evenings, through the grove-shaded streets where banyan roots broke through sidewalks and lizards darted under fences. The smell of salt and fried plantains hung in the air, familiar, grounding. Sometimes I imagined Jessica walking beside me, her hand brushing mine, her laugh rising above the cicadas. Memory has a cruel way of resurrecting ghosts exactly when you don't want them. But walking also gave me clarity. Step by step, I began to remember who I was before her. The boy who arrived in this city with calloused hands and no connections. The man who sweated under the Florida sun until he could afford his first investment property. That man didn't need her to survive. That man could rebuild. And isn't that the strange mercy of betrayal? It forces you back to yourself, even if the journey feels like walking barefoot over glass. At night, though, when the house went dark and the hum of traffic softened, the ache returned. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every smile, every carefully hidden red flag. Could I have stopped it? Could I have seen the truth sooner? Or was I always meant to be the last one to know? That question gnawed at me, louder than the cicadas, heavier than the silence. And one night, I finally admitted to myself, this story wasn't over. The courtroom was just the prologue. The real reckoning, my reckoning, was only beginning. The next morning I woke before the sun, that old construction habit I never entirely unlearned. The house was blue with pre-dawn, the kind of light that makes even the honest furniture look suspicious. In the sink, a single plate leaned against the basin like a tired shoulder. I washed it, slow circles, the water running hot enough to sting. Isn't that ridiculous, needing to feel something bite the skin just to be sure I'm still here? I opened the sliding door to the patio and stepped onto the pavers I'd laid myself years ago, the grout lines true as a confession. The palms whispered. A mockingbird stitched scraps of other bird songs into something that sounded like plagiarism and prayer at once. Miami does that, borrows from everywhere, becomes itself. I used to admire it. Lately, I wonder if imitation is just another word for survival. On the patio table lay the 2-page document folded once, the crease precise as a scar. That paper had become a kind of talisman overnight, ridiculous and holy. I kept touching it, as if its texture could teach me what dignity felt like. Do you have an object like that? Something ordinary suddenly dragged into meaning because of what it witnessed. I put the pages into a manila envelope and slid it into the old fireproof box under the grill cover. Not romantic, I know, but I've lost enough to flame in my life, money, temper, trust. Some things I can still protect. By 8, the heat had turned serious. I showered, shaved the soft gray down under my jaw that Jessica used to tease with her fingertip, and dressed in a white linen shirt and jeans. The mirror offered me a man who looked like he had at last accepted the limits of his body. 62, shoulders still broad, but knocked with years. Eyes rimmed with a red that never quite left after the separation began. Do you ever look at yourself and see your father there without warning? Mine had that set mouth too, as if he were always bracing for a punch he refused to dodge. At 9, I drove to the office on Grand Avenue. Coconut Grove was already sweating. Joggers in sunscreen armor, dog walkers negotiating leashes like sea captains, tourists with hats like portable umbrellas. The office smelled like paper and old AC. On the wall, a framed photo of me standing in front of the first duplex I flipped, a narrow thing with stubborn windows and a porch that sagged like an old man's grin. I remember the day I signed those papers. I was 34 and terrified. The realtor asked, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm never sure. That's why I do it fast." Marta was waiting at her desk. If I'm going to tell this story correctly, you need to know Marta. Late 50s, hair in a practical bun that never quite tames the silver flyaways, hands that can sort chaos into stacks and to justice. She started as my bookkeeper 15 years ago and became, without warning, the conscience of the place. Strong in the way quiet people are strong. I never paid her enough, and I told her that, and she said, "Give me Saturdays off instead." I did. She stood when I walked in. "I heard," she said, her voice low, her eyes filming with anger, not pity, thank God. They called from downtown. Word travels. They always gossip more about laughter than verdicts, I said. Dropping my keys into the wooden bowl, she insisted I keep by the door. He laughed. "Good," she said, and sat, already pulling a stack of mail forward, already making problems obedient. "But it isn't over. Nothing ever is," I said. Do I sound weary? Maybe, or maybe just honest. We went through invoices, tenants who needed a plumber and tenants who needed patience, the city inspector who kept rescheduling and the roofer who kept promising. Real life insists on itself, even when your heart is rubble. Isn't that both mercy and cruelty? Payroll, receipts, insurance policies. Numbers that steadied me like railings on a staircase I could climb blind. Around noon, Marta cleared her throat. "Jessica's attorney called," she said, and I felt the old choke in my chest, not from fear, exactly, but from the reflex of bracing. "They want to talk settlement." A new one. I laughed, then quiet, the thin ribbon kind. "Do they?" They said she regrets the tone. Tone, I said, tasting the word as if it were a fruit gone bad. Tone was not the problem. Marta looked at me the way she does when she wants to nudge me toward my better self. "You should still listen," she said. "Not for her, for you. Closure is cheap to say and expensive to buy." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to say, let them simmer in their own stew. But anger is a debt with interest. It compounds. I've seen it bankrupt men who were otherwise careful. "Schedule it," I said. "But here, not downtown. If they want to talk, they can sit at our scratch table and look at who they're talking to." Marta nodded, typed, made it happen the way she always does. Then she hesitated. "And Michael?" "What?" "Don't go alone." "Who should I bring?" My stubbornness. She smiled, brief. "Bring Elaine." I felt something hitch. Elaine, my sister, 4 years younger, living in Little Havana, raising her grandson with a gentleness that looks like steel when anyone threatens it. Elaine doesn't attend conflicts. She presides over them. Our mother used to say Elaine could stare a hurricane into submission. And me? I always thought I could outbuild one. "Tell me, which strategy wins in the end?" "I'll call her," I said, though the idea of mixing family into the wreckage made my stomach tighten. Still, Marta was right more often than she was kind enough to mention. I drove to Little Havana after lunch, straight down US 1, the air like hot breath through the vents. The neighborhood had changed and not changed, new murals vivid as fresh bruises. Old men still arguing over dominoes at Maximo Gomez Park. A bakery smell that promised childhood and delivered sugar and coffee instead. I parked by Elaine's place, a pale yellow bungalow with a porch that had heard more family secrets than a confessional. She opened the door before I could knock. "You look tired," she said, kissing my cheek, holding my face in her hands like she used to when we were kids, and I came home scraped. "Come in. I made black beans." "Don't argue." "I'm not arguing," I said. Yet, in her kitchen, everything had a place. Pots nested like a family reunion, magnets on the fridge from cities she'd never visited, gifts from students she'd counseled over the years. The ceiling fan ticked a rhythm like a patient heart. She put a plate in front of me heavy enough to anchor a boat. I ate. What else could I do? Food is how our people deliver news and keep you alive to hear it. When I told her about the laugh, she didn't smile. "I would have liked to see her face," she said, which is as close to triumph as Elaine allowed herself. Then she reached across the table and tapped my knuckles. "Don't confuse a judge's laugh with salvation. She's not done. People like that don't accept no. They on for a later yes." "You think I don't know?" "I think you want to be finished. Wanting and being are not cousins." I set down my fork. "They asked for a meeting. Marta scheduled it. Here, in my office. I want you there." She leaned back, considering. "I'll come," she said. "Not as your guard dog, as your memory." "My memory?" "You forget the small cruelties," she said, soft but not unkind. "You excuse them until they metastasize. I won't let you do that again." I wanted to argue, to defend the man I'd been, the husband who tried, the partner who trusted. Instead, I nodded. "Isn't surrender sometimes just admitting someone else sees you more clearly than you see yourself?" Before I left, her grandson Lucito barreled into the kitchen with a baseball glove too big for his wrist. "Tell Mike," he shouted, and the sound cracked something brittle in me. "Let in a little water." He wanted me to throw him grounders in the yard. We did, and he missed most. And every miss he declared a learning opportunity, like his grandmother taught him. And in the middle of that crook little practice, I realized I was still a man who could teach a boy how to square his shoulders to a hop. Isn't that a kind of wealth that doesn't fit in a ledger? When I hugged Elaine goodbye, she held on a second too long. "Bring the papers," she said into my shoulder. "The settlement?" "No," she said. "Those 2 pages. The ones that saved you. Bring them to the meeting and put them on the table like a photograph of the truth." They came 2 days later. The son was indifferent, which seemed appropriate. Jessica arrived first, which surprised me. She was not a leader by timing, but by appearance. She wore a pale blue dress I remembered from a birthday party years ago. Subtle, expensive, the kind of fabric that makes poor people angry and rich people comfortable. Her hair was pulled back, a decision she made when she wanted to look rational. Behind her, 2 attorneys, a man and a woman, both with faces that practiced neutrality the way dancers practice balance. Marta sat at her desk outside, a guardian without a sword. Elaine and I waited at the conference table, really just the old dining table moved here from the first house we lost in the hurricane of '05. The scratches had traveled with us faithful. Jessica didn't look at me at first. She shook hands with the air, with the room, with the idea that none of this was personal. When her eyes did find mine, they were cool, the color of a pool lit at night. "Michael," she said, as if she'd found my name in an old box and dusted it off to see if it still fit. "Jessica," I said. Saying her name felt like stepping barefoot on a shell. Familiar, sharp. The female attorney Silva. She introduced herself, started talking, as if words could reroute history. "There's no benefit to anyone in prolonging this," she said. "Our proposal recognizes the contributions made by both parties and aims for a fair division that reflects." 70% wasn't a proposal, Elaine cut in, polite as a blade under a napkin. "It was a performance." Silva blinked, recalculated. The male attorney cleared his throat. Their choreography twitched. Jessica did not speak. She sat very still, hands folded, a pose I knew as her version of penance. How many times had I mistaken stillness for remorse? I reached into the fireproof box I'd carried in like a tackle box and placed the 2 pages on the table. No flourish. Just paper meeting wood. "We start here," I said. "This exists." It existed before we said vows. It existed when we bought the house on Franklin. It existed when we opened the line of credit for her boutique. And it existed when you filed for divorce and pretended not to remember. Jessica's jaw moved, a tiny click I'd learned to hear in sleep. I remember, she said. It was almost a whisper. Was that shame or strategy? Silva leaned forward. We acknowledge the prenup, she said. But we also have evidence of commingling of assets. Contributions that might not be strictly financial. Elaine laughed at a short sound with no humor in it. Contributions like trying to bankrupt him emotionally. Put a price on that. We'll pay in coins of insomnia. I touched her arm, a reminder. We would not win by volume. I turned to Jessica. Tell me, I said, softer than I expected. What did you want? Past the money. What did you want from me? Her eyes flicked to me, flinched, returned. Freedom, she said, and the word surprised everyone, even her. I wanted to leave before I became a footnote in your life story. By erasing my chapters? I asked. Isn't that a strange way to be free? Silva moved to intercede, but Jessica lifted a hand. I wanted proof I mattered, she said, a tremor entering the cool. Money reads like proof. It's childish. I know. She looked at the papers. You kept receipts, Michael, on everything. Even love, I think. Isn't that the kind of accusation that disorients because it's slightly true? I keep things. I archive. I save. Childhood taught me scarcity. Adulthood taught me that memory without documents is a rumor. We went back and forth for an hour percentages and valuations. The duplex on Fro Avenue. The warehouse near the river that became 5 lofts and a headache. The retirement accounts I didn't look at because looking made me feel old. The offers slid like chess pieces. We weren't fighting just over numbers. We were fighting over narrations of a marriage. What counted? What didn't? What proved a life? When the conversation finally stuck on a number that was not obscene and not generous, but survivable, Silva leaned back, satisfied with the shape of the day. We can draft the revision, she said. We'll need signatures by Friday. Friday, I said carefully, is my mother's birthday. I'll be at the cemetery. We'll sign Monday. Jessica looked up at that. You still go? She asked, not unkindly. Every year, I said. She's the reason I knew to keep those 2 pages. Your mother didn't trust me, Jessica said. And there was no accusation in it, just a fact finally laid on the table with the rest of them. She trusted me to be prepared, I said. Those aren't the same. Silva began gathering her files. The male attorney scooped his pens. The machinery of leaving started. And that's when Jessica did something I had not anticipated. She reached across the table, her hand hovering over the 2 pages, not touching. May I see them? She asked. There was no legal reason to refuse. There were 100 small personal ones. I slid them to her anyway. She read, lips moving slightly like a child whispering a poem. When she finished, she didn't look at me. She looked at Elaine. Take care of him, she said, and I don't know whether it was request or resignation. Elaine nodded once. I already do. They left. The door closed with that soft, expensive hush that never quite satisfies. Marta exhaled in the outer office. I picked up the 2 pages, and they felt heavier, as if they had absorbed one more scene, one more confession, and decided to carry it for me a while. Now it's over? I asked Elaine, and immediately hated the need in my voice. She tilted her head. Now it's quieter, she said. Don't confuse that with peace. I didn't sleep that night either. Does that surprise you? People assume that once the big monster is named, the little ones go quiet. But the small monsters are the ones that breed. I made tea instead of bourbon and sat on the porch with the 2 pages on my lap, like an animal I was training not to run away. The air smelled like wet earth and limes from the neighbor's tree. And somewhere a radio played a ballad that had decided to live forever. I thought of my father, the way he believed in contracts, the way other men believed in sacraments. He never sued anyone in his life. He just wanted signatures to hold. When I was 19 and thought poetry could pay rent, he made me sign a lease on the room above the garage. Promise yourself something, he said. Put it in ink. Isn't that what we all want, something outside us to keep us accountable when we go soft? At 2 a.m, a car slowed in front of the house. Headlights swept the porch like searchers. I stilled. The engine idled. Ben moved on. Nothing. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being looked at by someone who carried my name once and wanted to see what was left after the court. Paranoia? Maybe. Or maybe just the body learning new rules for safety. The next day I went to the cemetery. I brought my mother a small white lily in a jar and cleaned the stone with a cloth I kept for that purpose in the glove box. The sky was a bowl spiderwebbed with clouds. I told her everything, the laugh, the meeting, the number we'd circled. I spoke aloud because the dead don't judge tone. You were right, I said finally. Paper is a kind of spine. An older woman at the next plot, narrow shoulders, a dress the color of avocado skin, listened without pretending not to. When I finished, she said, "Men always think they invented betrayal. You didn't, but you seem to be learning the math of it." "The math?" "The part you subtract," she said, "so you can add the part that's left." She patted the top of her stone like it was a dog. I lost a husband to disease and a son to stupidity. I used ledger metaphors to keep from drowning. I nodded. "Does it work?" "Sometimes," she said, "for an hour. Then you start again." I almost asked her name. Instead I said, "Thank you," because I was raised to be polite to wisdom when it appears, even if it is wearing an avocado dress. On my way back to the car, the phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We should talk without lawyers." There was no signature, but I knew the cadence. I didn't answer. Have you ever noticed how silence can be the loudest refusal? I put the phone in the glove box with the cloth and the broken map of the city I refused to throw away because I liked the feeling of paper telling me where to go. Monday came. We signed. A number I could live with. A number that would not erase my work or her years. When the last pen lifted, the room exhaled. Jessica stood, hesitated. "There's something of mine at the house," she said. "My grandmother's rosary. I left it in the top drawer of the hall table." "It's there," I said. "I didn't touch it. I'd like to get it," she said, which was both a request and a test. Would I refuse and make the rosary a hostage? Would I accompany and make it a chaperone relic? I surprised myself. "I'll be home at 6, I said. "Door will be unlocked. Take it." "Unlocked?" Elaine murmured later when I told her. "You're either brave or nostalgic. Sometimes they wear the same jacket," I said. At 5:50, I sat at the kitchen table with the 2 pages in front of me, not because I needed to, but because ritual saves men like me from improvisation. At 6:03, the door opened. Jessica walked in alone, softer somehow without the orbit of counsel. She didn't cross the threshold fully, as if the house itself might refuse her entry, like a body does a transplanted organ. "The drawer," I said, nodding. "Top." She opened it, took the rosary, held it like a tiny vertebrae of faith. I remembered her grandmother, a woman who could sear meat and a man's pride with equal authority. "Thank you," Jessica said. We stood there a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator taking up the conversation we could not bear to start. Finally, she said, "I'm not a villain, Mike. I never married a villain," I said. "I married a person." She looked at the 2 pages on the table. "I hated you for keeping those," she said. And then her voice changed, softened into an admission she hadn't planned to make. "But I also knew you would. It's who you are. Reliable even in defense. What do you want me to be now?" I asked. "What do I do with the part of me that kept us afloat and sank us?" She touched the edge of the table with her fingers, the way you test water before stepping in. "Build something small," she said. "Something that doesn't need protecting." "Like what?" "I don't know," she said. "A garden. A friendship. A morning that belongs only to you." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "If I'd asked for half, would you have fought me?" "Yes," I said, honest finally, because it was never about the number. She nodded, as if she'd expected nothing less. Then she left, and I listened to the absence arrange itself around the furniture. I sat at the table with the 2 pages and thought about gardens. The yard behind the house was mostly concrete and practical plants that minded their business. I could tear up some pavers. I could make room. Isn't that what grief is? Land cleared by a storm, ready for something that grows slowly? I didn't start that night. I slept. For the first time in weeks, I slept until the sun touched my face and did not apologize for arriving. You want a villain? Here's the closest I can offer. Envy. Not hers, mine. Envy for people who loved clumsily but without records. Envy for men who lose and don't inventory. Isn't there a kind of holiness in ignorance when the world is kind to you? I never owned that holiness. I counted. I still do. The difference is now I'm counting days. I spent a week in small repairs. The hinge of the bathroom cabinet that always squealed at inappropriate moments. The loose tile by the back door that threatened socks. The flickering porch light that made the whole house look like it was winking. I've learned that if you fix enough small things, the big things wait politely their turn. They never truly leave, but they grant you a truce. On Thursday, Marta found me in the yard with a shovel and a plan sketched on the back of an old permit. You don't do small gardens, she said, shading her eyes. You do plazas. I'm trying to learn moderation, I said, patting the ground like a promise. She handed me a manila envelope, the same kind that held the 2 pages on the day they saved me. From the title company, she said. The warehouse sale closed. Funds came through? Good, I said. We can pay everyone and pretend we planned the timeline. She hesitated. And there's a letter, certified, from a firm in New York. New York? She nodded. Aunt Rose's estate. Aunt Rosa, the cousin of my mother, who lived like a rumor in Queens, who sent Christmas cards with women in fur coats that were actually soap opera stars. She'd visited once when I was 10, smelled like lily and cigarettes, and told me to never trust a man whose shoes squeaked. What does it say? Open it, Marta said, out loud. I like male drama. Inside, formal language, paragraphs like chess moves, and then the thing itself. She'd left me a small property in Hialeah, a single-story cinder-block building that rented to a tailor and a barber with a radio that only knew 3 stations. Suddenly, I was holding not just a gift, but a memory I didn't know I needed. Rosa had seen something of me and decided to anchor it. Why? Was this the universe's version of a wink, or the next test? Go look at it, Marta said. Now, I'll drive. We did. The building sat on a corner like a patient animal. The tailor waved. The barber nodded without removing the comb from a man's hair. I walked the perimeter, touched the stucco, listened to the sound the city makes when it is busy being ordinary. And there it was, the impulse, to keep this as it was, to resist my own habit of improvement. Could I do that? Could I hold a thing steady and call that love? Back at the office, I stopped by the conference table and placed Aunt Rose's letter next to the 2 pages. They looked like relatives. Paper, ink, rescue disguised as bureaucracy. What do you think? I asked the room like a fool. What do you, fool? The room, of course, said nothing, but the arrangement felt right. The past that saved me and the past that surprised me sitting together, making a shape I could look at when doubt arrived. That night, on the porch, I broke my own rule and texted Jessica back. We signed. I hope you find your mornings. She replied 20 minutes later, you too. No names. No stabs. Just 2 people who had decided to stop wounding each other by habit. Is that forgiveness? Or just exhaustion letting go of the knife? The first rain of the season came hard, as if the sky had been holding it in out of politeness and finally couldn't. The gutters overflowed. The garden in progress turned to dark pudding. I stood under the eave and watched the bougainvillea surrender and then stand up again, which is all the bravest plants do. In the rain's hiss, I heard my father's voice, the one that still occupies a room in my head. Make it so the water has someplace to go, and you'll survive most storms. So I dug a trench. I laid a French drain, gravel, and perforated pipe, the kind of work that settles the mind because the problem is honest and the solution is patient. The 2 pages were safe inside, and that knowledge freed my hands. Isn't it strange how knowing one thing is protected allows you to risk another? When the rain slowed to a polite applause, I went inside to find a message from Elaine. Come by tomorrow. I made something for your garden. Don't argue. She had made stepping stones from cast concrete, each pressed with a word before it set. Stay, listen, breathe, begin. I laughed when I saw them, then surprised myself by crying. We placed them together, not in a straight line but in a meander, the way life actually goes. Lucito hopped from one to the next as if they were islands in a hot river. Elaine patted my shoulder. You'll be fine, she said. Not today, but you will. Is that prophecy? It's stubbornness wearing lipstick, she said. That evening, as I set the last stone, My phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. I answered instead. Mr. Alvarez? A woman's voice, steady, with that practiced calm that tells you she pays attention for a living. My name is Dana Whitmore. I'm a reporter with the Herald. I heard about the laugh. Of course she had. News is a rumor that found shoes. No comment, I said reflexively. I don't want to write about gossip, she said. I'm writing about prenups. About how older men in Miami are protecting themselves after a spike in situations like yours. I'd like to hear your perspective. My perspective is that I'm tired, I said. She was quiet, then said, off the record, have you eaten? Because I've learned that men tell the truth only after rice. I laughed despite myself. Who told you that? My grandmother. She was right about everything except men, I considered. Isn't that what I keep doing considering? When for years I just acted? One coffee, I said. No names. No villain in your story. Deal, she said. Tomorrow? Versailles? Noon? Of course, I said. Where else do Miami's unofficial records get kept? I hung up and stood in the middle of my almost garden. The stepping stones drying, the drain settling, the bougainvillea preparing its next brave bloom. The 2 pages were inside, humming like a distant generator. And for the first time since the courthouse, I felt not just lighter but larger, as if my life had expanded to include not just what I'd defended but what I might yet build. Tell me, would you have said yes to the reporter? Or would you have closed the door on every story that wasn't already finished? Thank you for staying with me, for listening this far. Your attention is a rare and precious gift. These minutes you've spent here mean the world. And if this story meant something to you, if it touched you in some way and you feel it might stay with you, then please do this for me. Follow the channel. Every follow, every subscription is more than a number. It's a silent pact. It's the fuel that allows me to keep bringing you stories that have depth, that have truth, that linger. Because in the end, it's stories that connect us. And I want to keep building this journey with you. Until next time.